Today's guest is one of the most intellectual, deep thinkers that I know, and he's an amazing conversationalist. So for him, it was more a case that I knew I wanted to get him on the podcast, and then I wanted to know what topic we could talk about because there's such a broad range of things that we've had amazing conversations about. So for a bit of context, Ganesh is someone who is an incredible networker, and he has done incredibly well in business and worked his way up the corporate ladder, got a lovely big exit, and is now semi-retired, traveling the world and moving into angel investing. One of the things that he accredits this to is being an exceptional learner, having good learning methods and being able to pick things up quickly, because it's not just the corporate world he's excelled in. He has an ELO at chess at 2,400, which is the top percentile in the world, and many other things like sports, other games. He's just been incredible at picking up. So today he talks about how you can be a good learner, the art of learning, and what you should bear in mind when you're trying to pick up a new hobby, and also the power of connection and the power of networking, because he is genuinely the best networker I know. And I've shared some stories in this episode with him today of how his networking abilities impressed me and got us to the stage of our relationship where we're at as well. So an amazing episode, amazing guest, and I really hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. All right, Ganesh, brother, thank you so much for joining me in Bali and for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring you on to talk about learning. The reason why is you are good at it. You have learnt chess to an extremely high level, over 2,000 ELO for any of the chess players out there. You have learnt multiple careers. You are a business savant and a coach for others as well. So tell me a little bit about your background and where you are now.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me on. A little bit about myself. I grew up in a small town in Malaysia called Seremban. My dad was a government servant. My mom was a housewife. So I think growing up, it was, we didn't have a lot of disposable income. So I think being resourceful is very important at an early age, when it comes to, growing up and such. So I think that was kind of the start of my life where, you have a bunch of free time and you just want to learn new things.
I like that. What was the first thing that you learned and you thought, hey, I might have a talent for this?
Well, the first thing was actually football. Because my brother was always on the computer. We only had one in the house. My sister was in the room reading, and I had a ball, and I'd always go about kicking around. And I realized I had exceptionally good ball control when I was just dominating in school. And I think my peak was when I was 9 years old, when I was one of those kid mascots for the Sarawak state team. And yeah, at that point I thought maybe I could even be a footballer one day. But obviously that all changed when we moved to Peninsula, and my mom was like, hey, no sports, you have to get scholarships. Studying was always the main focus. So it kind of derailed my football career.
Parents always getting in the way of your dreams, eh?
Yeah.
Fair. So football was first. What came second?
Yeah. So I think as a result of not being able to play sports, I think chess was something I discovered quite late in my life. I was 12. And the reason being was, it was actually a funny story. Like, people in school would say, oh, I'm the dumb one in the family. My brother had a nickname, the brain, in school.
Nice.
And cause he was an absolute nerd. And they were like, hey, if you play football, it just means you're not very smart. So to kind of dispel that myth, I decided to pick up chess. And yeah, I fell in love with it, and I think through chess I learned a lot about life. I would put on Coldplay music at the time, all classical music, and just get deep into learning these different chess concepts. So I think that was really the start. And I realized I was good when I started picking up these concepts quite easily. It sort of came as a natural. But of course, the real test is when you go into a tournament setting. And there was this kid I looked up to. So back then there was no under 15, under 18. It was like an open tournament and he was 13 years old. And they were like 17-year-old kids. And this guy was dominating, right? I think there were 7 rounds and he had won all 7. And he was playing moves and walking around. And I was like, wow, I was in the middle of the pack. I had 3.5 points out of 7. And I'll never forget looking at him and being so inspired. And lo and behold, the next year at a district level competition, I actually played him in the last round. And at that point, with limited chess clocks. So all the chess clocks were with the older players. So he was moving really quickly. I was taking my time because there was no time. And I remember him being really frustrated, like, this guy is just taking his time, And then towards the end, when all the games had finished, I was the last game going, and they put a chess clock there. And they gave you like, guys, you have 5 minutes each to finish the game. At that point, I started moving really quickly. And I think he was already quite annoyed and he made a blunder and I ended up winning that game. And that was like a surreal moment, right? A guy you looked up to as a kid and now he's like your peer and I beat him. And we ultimately became best friends. We represented the state for 4 years and I got to learn a lot from him and we did our state quite proud. We were not like the top state at that time. The best players were from Kuala Lumpur, Selangor, because they had access to the best coaches. And, they would go for overseas tournaments. So we were all self-learned and our coaches were actually weaker than us. So we couldn't really learn from our coaches. But yeah, it was like, for me, it was truly amazing. I finished top 10 twice, 2 years, and I was quite proud given that I started playing chess late. And
it's funny how 12 is late in the game of chess.
Yeah, it
you get these absolute prodigies that haven't even had their 10th birthday yet.
And they're grandmasters,
Do you think you have to be intelligent to be good at chess?
And I think you have to be reasonably intelligent, right? But not this is necessarily equate to high IQ being exceptionally good at chess. I think true intelligence comes from the fact of curiosity and continuous learning. And I think that is something that's super key.
I think that's definitely something that you are an example of, because you've just come on holiday to Bali for a week and yesterday you sent me a video of you with a Rubik's Cube watching a lesson on how to learn the Rubik's Cube. Why do you think you have this obsession with learning?
I think a lot of learning comes from insecurity. I think that it started off that way. That, my brother was perceived as the smart one in the family and I was the youngest at the time and I was always trying to get attention, trying to be good at a bunch of things. But I always wanted to be an all-rounder. That was something I've always wanted to be good at, a range of things. I wanted to be good at sports, board games, academic, I just thought that was the ideal man that I would look up to as a kid. So it started off with chess. So I think some of the key strategies that I'd used to kind of accelerate the learning was understanding how to, deconstruct it into smaller things and being good at it, right? So one example, like in chess, it's a game of you have openings, middle game, and end game. And I would hone in potentially on tactics, for example. So I'd spend maybe a week only looking at forks and skewers and just basic tactics, right? And then maybe spend another week only looking at rook endgame positions, right? So being very focused on sub skills that is needed and knowing how to create a learning plan was something that was so useful. So another example is actually Scrabble. So Scrabble as well, I had no actual competitive experience and we would play in the family and my uncle would always make weird words, EF, which is the pronunciation of F. It's just different 2-letter words that can help you score high amounts of points. And then we always thought that, Scrabble was a game of vocabulary. The longer words means the most points. When actually, no, not at all. It's nothing to do with your language. In fact, it's a game of mathematics, actually, statistics. And you want to have a balance of, for example, equal number of consonants and vowels. If you want to make bingos is where you use all 7 tiles, you get 50 extra points. You want to have different strategies like using prefixes. If you have an ing, putting it at the last 3 letters, re, bring it to the front. So all these different techniques are actual tips. And just learning that and memorizing, let's say, the 2- and 3-letter word list, you're automatically in the top 1% now. Like I didn't need to do the 4 and 5 letters. Like that would bring you to the 0.01%. But for me, just getting highly competent was sufficient to keep me going and happy. Yeah.
Have you ever studied anything on game theory?
And game theory, like Nash equilibrium, incentives. I did a lot of reading on that. But I suppose game theory is more in, understanding decision making, right? Like, and that is more applicable for games like Catan and Risk. And so those are games as well, where you can actually master one or two, philosophies, and you can immediately be in the top 1% of the game. And I think is knowing what to learn and how to learn it is it's key.
For Risk, it's putting all of your troops on one territory at the beginning, right?
No. Risk, actually, the most important way to win at Risk is to attack. When you attack someone, you have to kind of be apologetic about it and say, I didn't really have a choice. I didn't have a choice. This is the right decision for me to make, so that he doesn't feel offended. It's really about managing people's emotions.
I love that. Risk, for anyone that doesn't know, is a board game that you play mostly in person, although it has moved online now as well.
Yeah.
And each of you have a map of the world in front of you. Each of you gets the same amount of troops to start off with. You allocate your troops, and then it's about world domination or completing your mission. That you're being given. Yeah. And it is absolute havoc to play with your family at Christmas.
Absolutely.
And I love it. It's my favorite board game to play, but every time it's like, why are you picking on me? What are you doing this for? And I think that's such a good nugget, that the best thing that you can do to be good at the game is to not piss people off and not make enemies.
Exactly. That's it. Yeah. And make subtle allies.
I think there is crossovers with game theory in all of these things that you're playing. And I think if you did study game theory formally, you would realize that you already knew 80% of the course before sitting it. And there's been a big rise in battle royale games recently, and in the last sort of 5 years, where they've grown in popularity. And again, for people that don't know, battle royale is just a format in which you'll have however many people, like 100 people in, and you're all fighting for one winner at the end, right? A sort of fight to the death with the last man standing. And the best tactic that you can have to improve your success in that, what's the word? The label that it's given is TWAT, which stands for Tactical Warfare Aversion Technique. And it's the same principle that you're talking about there, that the best thing that you can do is just to avoid trouble and keep your head down. And it's going to do the most in getting you there. And there are going to come points where you don't have a choice, right? And you have to pick a fight. But just by biding your time, exhibiting patience, and avoiding as much drama as possible will get you the furthest.
Absolutely. There's also other strategies where I would say would be kind of filling a void. So I think back then in school, the whole objective of going through school is actually to get that overseas scholarship. That's like the holy grail, right? And you wanted to have like as widespread co-curricular sports. And so I couldn't really play a lot of sports which required a lot of time, but cricket was like a natural thing. My dad was a national cricketer, but I didn't have any talent for it. And our team was the strongest team, actually. It was the strongest team in the country at that point. We had a lot of state players. And I was like, how do I get in the team? And I realized everyone wanted the glory of being a batsman. And I realized that we had a lot of fast bowlers. It's also very sexy to be a fast bowler. And I saw there was a gap where we didn't have enough spinners. So I just specialized at being be an off-spin bowler. And I decided to be the best fielder I could ever be. And I would show up to all of the trainings. And I was a hype man on the pitch. I was the guy that, like I was actually reserved at nationals. We got second at nationals, but I was like, when there's a drinks break, I'm coming in with the water. So by merit, I shouldn't have been in the team. But I found like picked the skill, I just worked hard on the pitch, provided a lot of support and be the hype man for the team. And I achieved my desired objective, you know. So sometimes even if you don't have a winning hand, you got to navigate.
So many crossovers from gamesmanship into
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of an adage that to be successful in business, you have to find what no one else wants to do
Yeah.
and just do it better.
Absolutely.
And that's what you did, right?
Yeah.
You spotted a gap in the market
Yeah.
where there wasn't a lot of competition looking to take it up.
Yeah.
And you went in there and you just did it better than everyone else. And that gave you a competitive edge to get you into the team.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of crossovers from your competitive sporting and mental game youth that has led you to be successful in business.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think are some of the biggest principles that you will have learned from your youth that are carried on to the business world?
Yeah. I think interpersonal skills, I would say, was the biggest game changer. And that was something that was kind of sorely lacking in school. Because I was just so focused. I had a dream, you know, I was going to go to Oxford to do theoretical physics. That was the ambition, right? And when I got my SPM results, it's like an O-level equivalent, at 11 A1s, 1 B3. And because of the B3, I didn't get an overseas scholarship. I had a local scholarship instead. And I went through a little bit of depression at the time because, you know, I studied so hard, but I'm in the same class with guys that got 2 A's, you know, and I'm like, what was the point of all that effort? And so for me, I was like, okay, what do I need to do? So I spoke to my brother. So he was like a Petronas scholar. He had achieved, you know, the parents' favorite kid, right? Like he achieved everything. And he told me, even if you are in a small pond, be the biggest fish, right? And one way I thought to do that was to become student council president, right? So that was my goal. So I got to, you know, I think that was like a key thing that really built my interpersonal skills. So I went to this university called Nilai, and you had students from Korea, Pakistan, Africa, Southeast Asia. It was truly global. It's like a global village. And at the canteen, the cafeteria, you have different groups of students sitting with each other. You got the Korean group, then you got the cool kids group. It's kind of like a hybrid of different cultures. You got a Kazakhstan group. And I remember being very deliberate in building these interpersonal skills that I would sit with a different table every other day, make new friends, knowing fully well that one day I would want to run for elections and get them to vote for me, which is what happened. So I was like the youngest ever democratically elected student council president at the time. And he had 65% of the votes. And so for me, that was really cool because I realized just being myself, even though I was kind of skinny, I was kind of nerdy but people just liked the good vibes, good chat.
What taught you that was a good approach? Did you just figure it out yourself? Did you think that this is what I want to do and I know the best way to do it is networking, or was there something that gave you that?
I think it was a little bit like I was observing and you know, kind of like chess, you deconstruct and you see different kind of groups. And that's how I was deconstructing these. I realized that, you know, people are hanging out with different groups. And if you just penetrate those groups, you kind of learn about their culture. And I kind of memorized all the capital cities of the world. And I kind of use it in good fashion, right? Like someone says, hey, I'm from Somalia. I'm like, dude, Mogadishu, you know, and the guy's like, what? You know, my country. Immediately they're like, they're so happy to, and that's when I realized geography actually also helps. So that was one tactic, right? So I think from that first election, they had brought 10 people to get into this voting. And from the 10 people, they're going to vote the president. So you just get to be one of the 10. And I realized that there was a nursing block which there was a large number of nurses and they had 3 of the 10 positions, but nobody was kind of advocating or promoting to them. But I knew that those votes would matter later on. So I was kind of, in advance, I was already kind of building alliances.
It was all the game.
I kind of applied game theory to it. And it was crazy when it actually works. You're like, wow, you actually strategized it, you executed it, and you achieved your goal. So that for me gave me a lot of confidence in my social abilities. Yeah.
We have a mutual friend, Juria, and Jury and I have spoken about you, and one of the things that we've said is you are the best networker that either of us know. And I just want to share a story of something that you did, which I think I learned a big lesson from. Yeah, you definitely taught me something on this front. You and I were talking about chess. So we found some commonality. We had good conversations about chess. We had some games, and one of them I'm pretty sure you let me win, but I'll just take it anyway. And then afterwards, you said, "Hey man, look, I bought you a present next time I saw you." And you gave me a book on chess, which you'd had
Paul
since you were a
Morphy.
kid. And yeah, Paul Morphy. And it's a small token, right? It's a
Yeah.
book that you've had for 20 years or so.
Yeah.
But it just shows that you've been mindful. It shows that you have gone out of your way to do something thoughtful, right? And it's a small token. And in my head, I was shocked. I was like, wow, that's not something you see
Yeah.
every day, right? And in the world of social media, the modern day and age where connection is dwindling in comparison to what it used to be, it meant a lot. And it's something that resonated in my head, and it makes me think, Ganesh is a fucking nice guy. I want to do something back for him. And so I told you, I found a good book, and I was like, right, I'm going to get Ganesh a copy of this book, right? And long story short, you already have the book, and it was a complete failure. But it's the fact that you instilled that mindset into me, that you are a nice guy who thinks a lot about me because you made that gesture. And I was immediately thinking, how can I repay it?
Wow.
And you know Alex Hormozy.
Yeah.
I found like I've quoted him on every episode recently.
Yeah.
People are going to be like, get off his dick, man. But it's one of the things that he says, like, when you're starting out in business, you're going to struggle to find people that are going to want to pay you for your services straight away. When you're new in the game, you've got no experience, you've got no testimonials, you've got no track record. It's going to be hard. He was like, so you should just do as much as you can for people and ask for nothing back.
Yeah.
And it's a hard concept to grasp, right? Like, why do I want to go and put myself out there and do all of that for free? And it's because if you do that, if you meet people and you just go above and beyond and you're not asking for anything back, they're going to be thinking, Ganesh is a good guy. Like, what can I do to help him? So when you go back to them 6 months later and you say, hey, look, I'm now launching my business fully, like, would you mind just being a testimonial for me? And do you know anyone that I could help? They're going to be like, let me look at my phone book. You did an amazing job for me. Like, how can I help you back? And I don't think it was that calculated on your part, but it's just an interesting example of something that I'd heard in theory from Alex Hormozy talking about it, that made me feel exactly the way that he said people would when you do go above and beyond for them.
Wow. I mean, if I'm being honest, like, the reason that I have that is not really intrinsic because, like my brother was like that to me. Like all of my reading materials from, Carl Sagan, Ray Kurzweil, Richard Dawkins, I never discovered any of these authors on my own. I was kind of his disciple where he would just give me these books and my best friend, Kai and Jan, amazing individuals. And that's one of those things we would always do, and I think the natural reaction is to pay it forward. So when someone has done something good for you, you're going to pay it forward to someone else. They're going to pay it forward. And I think that's the beauty of, building authentic relationships, right? Yeah.
You said that you learned quite a lot from your friends about networking, right?
Yeah.
What did they teach you?
And so I think one of the most important skills that, I never really had was how to negotiate. Because I'm naturally a people pleaser. And I always go, above and beyond to help people. And I have difficulty saying no, but sometimes at the expense of yourself. And I think learning how to say no was one principle. And being a good negotiator is absolutely critical. I think that comes back to game theory, understanding what are their incentives, and ensuring that, especially in the corporate world, to really succeed. And it's really all about communication, right? Nobody's going to know how hard you worked if your boss is not communicating that to the leaders for you to get those promotions. So I was quite lucky when I was at RHB, for example. It's a bank, traditional bank, and I have zero banking experience coming into this, heading up innovation and people are like skeptical. Don't we innovate already? So there was so much pushback when I'd come in, but I was like, wait, I know nothing about banking, so let me do what I do with everything else, with chess, design thinking. Let me study, right? So I'd analyzed the organization structure. I'd identified, different categories of people. So I had a category called historians. Historians are people that have been in the company for 15 years plus, right? I had people that have joined the company for, let's say, 3 to 4 years. People from retail, from SME, from investment banking. And I came up with a list of 20 people, and I reached out to them, did a 1-hour interview with them, gathered all of these insights. So now I kind of had an understanding of, wow, if you want to get, let's say, a product approved, you need to go through 3 committees. These are the decision makers. These are the key people you need to ally with. These are going to be your naysayers. So automatically you kind of had the lay of the land, right? So when I was running innovation labs, right, I knew the people that were not really on my side were like risk, operations. They're like, this guy is just, what's he talking about? So what I would do then is, I came up with different awards for participants. If you're the best at interviewing, I give you the Oprah Winfrey Award. You're the best at ideation, you get the Edison Award. And these awards were actually used to incentivize individual contributors. Because let's say we run labs, each lab has like 6 people in a group. 2 people are carrying most of the weight at times, and they need to be rewarded. So hence we came up with this individual contribution awards. And what was interesting was I got the chief risk officer to give out the Edison Award. I got the chief operating officer to give out a certain award. So now they were part of the award ceremony. They had to kind of vouch for innovation. And, the teams actually did well. And we even communicated those outcomes to the wider bank audience. And all of these things was, projected with our internal Shark Tank. We had a live demo day. And all of a sudden it became cool. And they're like, okay, cool. Since we're given credit and the teams are given credit, now they're more open to working with you. And I think that was something I realized was very powerful. Yeah.
It's almost counterintuitive as well, right?
Yeah.
Because I know the feeling of being in a position where you can pick someone for something and you're naturally inclined to go for people that you already have a good relationship with, right?
Yeah.
But by putting that aside and by giving people that you haven't necessarily got as strong of a relationship with, you give it an opportunity to build that.
Yeah.
Smart, man.
Kill them with kindness.
Kill them with kindness and get them on side. So it was a success?
Yeah. It was a very good success. Yeah.
Nice, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think another thing that I think when I hear you talk is that you're very cognizant about what it is that has been successful for you, right? You understand where the successes in your life have come from, and you can look and point to these individual events like that one where you pulled things together to make it work.
Yeah.
Does that tie in to the learning? And where I'm going with this is learning is something we often think of as something extrinsic, right? It's something that we take from the world and we bring into ourselves. But recently I found that a massive portion of my learning has actually been intrinsic and looking at myself. So as my expert learner, how can you add some insights to that?
Yeah, and I think, that's a great point. Actually starting with yourself and doing that work was actually very important. Understanding what your values are, and there's actually a lot of free tests that are available. You can do a values test, a strengths test, an Enneagram, just to understand the type of person you are. Because I realized, like, when I was in my early 20s and I was going through a phase where I was trying to optimize my sleep, I was really in the whole personal growth, and none of my friends understood that at that time. And they were like, what's wrong with you? You just eat whatever you want, just sleep, just, life in moderation. Like it was a bad thing what I was doing, and until I ended up meeting my tribe. And, everyone's got, like, one guy's got a whoop strap, one guy's got an aura. Everyone's, constantly looking at different ways to kind of optimize and improve. And I didn't feel weird anymore, So I think sometimes when people are going through that, when you discover something about yourself and And if you feel that no one is accepting you for who you are, then maybe you're just not with the right tribe.
I just did a solo episode,
Yeah.
and that was one of the main focuses on it. So the episode was on traveling.
Yeah.
For those of you that haven't listened to it, it's just me waffling for 25 minutes about living overseas. But one of the biggest things for me that makes me a proponent of it is the fact that if you haven't felt like you belong, if you felt like you've been trying to force yourself to fit in for your childhood and your teenage life, you grow up sort of feeling like you're weird or you're an outcast, right?
Yeah.
And then by traveling, by immersing yourself in different groups, you meet people that you just have this, you're on the same wavelength with,
Yeah.
right? And you can be yourself. You don't feel the need to try and be different to fit in.
Yeah.
And in those moments where you instinctively do it, you realize that they see through it. You know, they understand you, they know you. And that's been the best thing for me about traveling, because I grew up feeling exactly like you did, like not having found my tribe and feeling like I was weird. And then you meet people that you do just fit in with, and it all clicks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, traveling is, for me, it's the ultimate source of learning, actually. You know, it just resets you. And I think a lot of because I remember doing this social hack when I was in France. This was back in 2011. It was the French Open tennis. And so at that point, when you have passes, once you exit, you can't go back in. So I remember waiting outside the VIP exit, and someone came up like, "Hey, can I have your tag?" And then they kind of they gave it to me, but they told me it was going to be useless, right? And I remember thinking, okay, what's the way can I leverage social engineering to try and get in, right? So I tried walking in first. I was doing this, what's it called, couch surfing. So I had this French local was with me, and I was like, hey, why don't we just try and get in? And I tried walking into one of the entrances, and they're like, what are you doing? They didn't allow me. So I'm like, okay, go kicked out. But there was like 26 entrances around the stadium. I just kept going one by one by one, just using different techniques, different excuses. Eventually, I found a guard that was quite nice, it was a bit weak. And I was like, hey, I need to go in. My parents are there. I had to run out I lost my camera. And he was like, okay, fine. He wasn't sure, but he's like, okay, fine, you go in, but she stays with me. So I was like, sure. I said, I need to find my parents in there. So cool. So I go in there, and I had to look for someone that looks Indian, right? That could be my parents. And I find like a family, right? They had 2 kids, an old couple. And I go to them, and I'm like, guys, okay, this situation. I really wanted to come in to get some merchandise. And, there's no entrance in. All the tickets are sold out. Could you pretend and say you're my dad, you're my parents? And the dad was like, I'm not sure. I don't want to jeopardize my family. But the kids were like, Dad, do it. It's going to be good. So we end up going to the guard, and he pretends to be my dad, and we managed to get in, So I think these are kind of the interesting things you learn when you travel, because you can be anyone you want.
You get many attempts at different lives. That's an interesting example of one. Yeah. You just became an adopted member of a new family. Amazing. Give us some tips for learning. And you mentioned that you can have like different tests and different values when it comes to learning. Yeah. And I know through years of coming to terms with myself that I have a very specific style of learning that works for me, and a very specific style that doesn't. Yeah. Because I have attention difficulties, which means that a lot of conventional ways, like sitting and reading textbooks or even watching someone else do something,
is easier for you?
No, it's not. I zone out. I will be in my own daydreams, and I will come to as they're finishing up being like, shit, I didn't take in anything of what they just said. So I know for me that the way that I learn is I'm given brief instructions that are sort of an overall. I then do it myself with someone watching me and just correcting it as I go. And I'll only need 1 or 2 run-throughs, or 1, 2 if it's more complicated, of doing it that way. But I need to physically do it myself in order to learn something. Do you have any tips for people that have that sort of learning style, or how does your learning style differ?
Honestly, I would say that is kind of same as my learning style as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, one example would be, so before I taken up this role at the bank, I needed to position myself as a design thinking expert, right? That's what I was told about the role. And in reality, I had zero knowledge about design thinking. But I really wanted the role. I thought it was a big opportunity. How am I going to position myself for this role? And so what I did was I was updating my LinkedIn saying I'm a design thinking leader. I was advised to by my friend to do that. And I identified, okay, what are the books that I need to read? So I read Design Thinking Playbook. I read Lean Startup. I read Sprint. Can't remember what the fourth one was, but it's around the same area. And I connected with people that had their own innovation consultancies. I sat down as a co-facilitator at one of those sessions, labs that they were running. I looked at how they break out the sessions, what kind of music they had, what kind of props they had, how they navigated through the different parts of the different stages of design thinking. But I've never done it myself, right? But lo and behold, a university actually reached out to me on LinkedIn. Hey, can you help run a design thinking workshop, right? So I went on YouTube. I saw Career Foundry. They had a problem statement. And based on what I had learned, I literally have never done a workshop before. But I'd been in one and I had watched it on YouTube. And I was like, okay, now it's real time, right? But I'm dealing with like 21-year-old students. I was like, okay, the cost of the risk is quite low if anything goes well. And it went great. And I think sitting in those labs, right, watching them do it and learning, taking notes, I think that is experiential learning is the way to go. The problem that might occur with too much experiential learning is the fact that you might get too excited about the activity rather than the learning, right? For example, if let's say you want to learn tennis, you might think playing more tennis equates to being better, right? And so I think it's not so much being very targeted about what you're learning, and the intensity matters. So for example, if you wanted to pick up tennis, for example, instead of playing once a week for the whole year, so you have 55 sessions, right? Once a week for the whole year. If you compress those 55 sessions in, let's say, 3 months, you can do that one session per week for 3 years, but doing it in the 3 months, you're going to achieve far better outputs than doing it very gradually. So I think intensity matters and focus matters. Combining experiential with coming back, reflecting on those learning and course correcting. And it's easier said than done. I think the natural tendency is you have fun playing, but you also don't want to lose the joy of playing. So having that balance, I think, is key.
100%. Yeah. When I was doing my finance qualifications, I did the UK qualifications first, and the time that they recommend to complete them all, because it's 6 exams, is between 18 and 24 months. And when I was trying to get a job in finance, I got rejected from everyone. I just applied to a bunch of people. I'd just left university with a business management degree. It wasn't even related to finance, but I decided I wanted to get into it. I sent a load of applications and it was nothing. So I was like, right, I need to make a statement. So I put myself through the exams, because these companies, when you join with no exams, they'll pay for you to do them, right?
Nice.
So that's what I was trying to get in to do, but I had no luck. So I paid for the exams for myself, and I quit my job. And people were saying, like, you haven't got anything else lined up? And I'm like, no, I've got a plan. And I just started smashing out these exams. And it took me about 2 weeks to do each one, of just like intense studying, doing the exam. Next one gets booked straight away. Let's go. So in a month and a half, I did half of the course.
Wow.
And I put it through myself. And the thing is, it's not that big of a feat. It's just the thought of doing that level of intensity is a lot, right? The thought of studying for 8 to 12 hours a day, every day for a total of 3 months, like that is hell for most people. Well, most people aren't in the financial position to just quit their job and spend a load of money on this education and do it, right? So I'd done the first 3 and I was like, right, I'm going to try applying again. Now I've got half of the qualification done. And I sent it out, and straight away my inbox was like, bang, 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 let's talk. And like, are the dates on these right? Like, when I'm in the interview, and I was like, yeah, I've done it all myself. And they're like, that's ridiculously fast. And I was like, I wanted to make a statement. And also, when you get yourself in that mode, as you were saying, where you can just go one after the other, I find that easier than having a course hanging over my head for a year and a half, 2 years, and just be like, oh, I've got another exam coming in 3 months, you know?
Yeah.
I almost, when you give it that level of intensity and you have that level of determination and drive behind it, it makes it a challenge. It makes it fun. Whereas
it's like a flywheel effect, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, again, something that I learned about myself during that period, that if I want to do something, I want to do it 100% or I don't want to do it at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you know, people have this conception that you need a lot of, because ultimately these durations are just arbitrary, right? You know, it's if I give you a week to do something and I give you a day, you're gonna finish it in a day or a week, but the quality obviously might differ. But it's finding that sweet spot where you're gonna hit. Maybe it could take 3 days is kind of the sweet spot where you get, doesn't have to be perfect, but it's sufficiently good to move ahead.
Yeah, 100%. Because when you give someone a week, it's not like if you give them a day, you're giving them 24 hours. And if you give them a week, you're giving them 168 hours.
It's not like that.
It's not like that. It's the same with the course, right?
Yeah.
It's not like I did 3 months worth of studying in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because when I got this job at this firm, there was over 100 staff there, and most of them were getting put through their exams, right? And they were doing them at the standard pace, which is one every 3 to 4 months.
Yeah.
And what that 3 months looked like was they would finish an exam, they would pass, they would have a month off to recover from having studied and done an exam. Then they would start slowly studying for a month, just doing like half an hour a day. And then the last month, they're like, oh shit, now I'm going to do 3 hours a day.
Yeah.
So I probably did the same amount of studying as them, right? It's not like I actually did, you know, more or less work by doing it in the time frame. It's just the intensity, because when you have a deadline for yourself, it makes you move, right?
And retention. You know, because you're not spreading it over long. People forget. It's very
100%.
natural, And then sometimes when you're learning the next one, you got to, I need to relearn. And there's a bit of efficiency wastage there.
100%. You know? So yeah, I'm a massive proponent of that. Intensity, I think, is such a good tip for people.
Yeah.
Be intentional about it. Be intense.
Yeah.
What else can you share in terms of a value nugget?
I think another value nugget is the, you know, I think some people obsess with specialization. And, you know, I think you and I were more of a generalist.
Yeah.
And there's this book, Range by David Epstein, not to be confused with Jeffrey, where, you know, he basically analyzes, you know, high performers across a range of different sports. And what he notices, a large number of world-class athletes actually had variety in their repertoire growing up before they actually narrowed down, because there's so much cross-learning, you know. For example, you know, me playing cricket and tennis, right? The follow-through action is very similar. The way you hit your bat, the movement, you know, and you can take those tennis into table tennis, you know, and use those kind of same kind of, you know, hand-eye coordination, and, you know, chess as well, dealing with under pressure. It applies to different kind of sporting situations. There's so many things that you can actually cross-learn, and it actually helps with memory retention as well. You know, you're building more neural pathways, you're getting more of these connections, and that's the same way with like me memorizing like geographical capital cities of the world, memorizing the flags. And what I realize whenever I'm reading news, I actually retain news better. You know, when someone says, oh, the greater NTs, okay, I actually know, all right, cool. What are those countries? Western Europe. Okay, I know which is the Western bloc or Slavic bloc, you know, so it actually helps you in life in general. So I think that's what I would strongly recommend. Try to have diversity. Yeah.
It's interesting take, right? Because it's a bit of a dichotomy in that one school of thinking is to specialize down into one thing, because there's an American colloquialism, is the riches are in the niches.
Yeah.
And that niches is niche.
Yeah.
Niches, but just said like that for rhyming, right? And I see where they're coming from.
Yeah.
When I quit my last job because I wanted to focus on the social media more, I spoke to one of the directors at the firm who I actually respected quite a lot. I thought quite a lot of him. And he said to me that he is a big advocate of just picking one course and staying with it. And he was a good example of that. Like, he picked one course, he has stuck with it for 15 years, and he's got himself in the position at 32 years old of earning millions of dollars a year, right?
Yeah.
And again, I'm not going to say his name, but another business guy that I listen to, he is a massive proponent of that. He's like, pick something, stick with it, put 10 years into it and see where you end up. Because whenever you change lanes, you're not starting from the same position that you are in the lane you're in at the moment. So yes, it might be a more attractive lane, but you've got to go back to the start in order to do it. But I'm definitely more in the camp of what you're talking about in terms of generalist, because character-wise, I am not someone that was meant to pick one thing and stick at it for 50 years. I couldn't do it. So I think that a big part of what's right for you in terms of being a generalist or in terms of being a specialist is your own nature.
Exactly. You can't deviate from that, because otherwise you're just not going to be fulfilled. I
don't think it's a free pass, though, because my mum has called me out recently for being too much of a generalist and focusing on too many things. And she's right. I have just released my 20th episode of the podcast, which was a big milestone for me.
Congrats.
Thanks. For me, it has actually been a bit of an achievement, because it's something, when I set out to do this, I had such a love for podcasts because it had taught me so much about myself. It was a perfect way for me to consume information because I could do it whilst doing something else, like going to the gym. So it didn't feel like I was doing forced learning, right? It was in an entertainment form of learning. And so I really wanted to do it. I wanted to have deep conversations with people. I wanted to feel like I could teach other people and let them learn from my experiences. I wanted to bring on incredible guests that could help people learn. And then when I got into it, of course, there's a lot of work underneath everything. And I realized it was a lot more work than I thought it would be. A lot more shit goes wrong than I thought it would. And it's a lot more challenging. And I've thought about quitting quite a lot of times, because the podcast isn't a money earner for me. It was never meant to be a money earner. It was meant to be a passion project. And it actually costs a lot more money to run it than I thought it would, in terms of editing, in terms of producing, in terms of marketing, in terms of getting thumbnails built, and in terms of creating reels to promote it on social media, right? It's a bloody expensive hobby. And then with everything going wrong. But the reason I hit 20 episodes was because of the statistic that 98% of podcasters don't ever get to their 20th episode.
Wow.
And I have this thing in the back of my head, which I said to you the other day, is like, when you think of yourself, do you think of yourself as someone who is determined, who is resilient, who stays the course, or do you think of yourself as a quitter? And your answer was actually probably resilient to a fault, right? As in, you will stick at things for too long. Whereas for me, I will drop anything as soon as it gets challenging, whether that's a job, a relationship, a place that I'm living, or a hobby. So for me, I've been determined to do this. And I think that when we're talking about generalist versus specialist, that's a big factor in it as well, right?
But I think, you're probably being a bit harsh on yourself at times, I think, because if you look at from a physical standpoint, right, that is something you've stuck at, right? You kind of have a Greek god physique, right, so to speak. And because generalist does not mean that you have like 10% knowledge of a range of subjects. You have some subjects where you have like a deep understanding of, and some you have, a more shallow understanding. And then even those shallow understandings actually help you get deeper sometimes, right? And so I think ultimately I do agree that you have to go deep in something, but having a broad knowledge like across can actually help you go even deeper within your whatever you want to specialize in, because you're just going to get those different perspectives. And for me, I love to leverage friends that are experts at specific things. Like for me, I think when we were training at the gym the other day, you were pushing me to failure. For me, that was like, I rarely achieve those kind of whenever I go with myself, for example, right? I don't hit those levels of failure. And it's but leveraging your network. If you have a bunch of, you don't have to be an expert at everything, because sometimes coordinating is also a skill. Coordinating experts to solve a problem. And most problems these days are not like, oh, I need one specialist engineer. Like now every problem will definitely have like a tech component to it in terms of, enabling, the solution to be delivered more effectively, where you would have to leverage different experts. And I think having, let's say you were to leverage a software engineer, right, to help you build a product. If you had zero knowledge about software engineering, he could just take the mickey out of you, right? He could just be charge you a big chunk.
Talk about this in finance. Yeah.
But the fact that, so like I've worked with developers over time, and I know when they're full of shit or when they're not. And I know how long it takes to do certain things. And I know now with existing solutions, there's no code solutions, as you can, get code really quickly. So you can actually, or you can talk to your experts. Hey, how long would it actually take to build something like this? So I think having that level of generalist knowledge can be beneficial while you
100%.
focus on your. Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah,
because I realized even as I was talking about the generalist versus specialist thing, I was literally talking about it with that mindset of a generalist means you're just sort of 10% everything.
Yeah.
But you're not. Like you can be 80% in something.
Yeah.
Specialist just means that is like you're taking it to that 90% plus, right? Or that's the goal by doing that.
Yeah.
No, I like that because I definitely feel like I'm more than 10% at a lot of things, right? But I just feel like there's so many different baskets that.
But you're 80% at a lot of things too. I'd say, yeah.
I think that is something that is a really important thing to bear in mind. If you look at your progress scale in terms of percentage, to go from 0 to 10% at something takes no time at all.
Really?
You know what I mean? You can go from 0 to 10% at chess in a day.
In a day.
Right?
In a day.
How long does it take to go from 90% to 100% at chess?
Ooh.
You probably don't have enough time in a lifetime. Exactly.
No.
So it's different, right?
Yep.
So the time it takes to get to 80% is probably less than it takes to get from 80 to 90% at something.
Exactly.
So you can afford to be a generalist in a lot of things.
At a very low cost of time.
At a very low cost of time.
So Tim Ferriss calls it, I think, minimum effective dose. Yeah, or minimum level of competency, right? Like that is all you need to get to have a decent, because I apply that for any sport that I play, whether it's paddle, whether it's pickleball, you just get to the minimal level of competence where you can have strokes and rallies. I don't need to be a competitive player, but I want to be able to at least have a good game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Ganesh, this has been everything that I thought and hoped it would be and more. Thank you so much.
Dude, thank you for giving me an opportunity.
If anyone's listening and wants to keep up with what you're doing, where can they go? I'm
on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me by my full name. It's a mouthful. Ganesh Mahendranathan.
I will put it in the bio for people that don't know how to spell Mahendranathan just from hearing it.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.
Pleasure.
Nice one.
Well said, man. All right.